think I'm about to build something that you've never seen before. You see, I woke up in the middle of the night with an idea. And as I couldn't get back to sleep, I ended up planning it in my head for 2 hours. And what it involves is this space behind me. You see, corners might be the biggest waste of space in any workshop. And hopefully, I'm about to solve that. And though I haven't done it yet, I've got some famous last words for you. This is going to be a really simple build. And this video is sponsored by Squarespace. So I think the best thing left for us to do now is just to get started. And while I show you the ingredients of the build, I want to set you a little bit of a challenge. I'm going to try my best to hide what this is going to be throughout the entire video. And my challenge to you is to be honest. And I mean proper honest. Because I want you to write a comment when you think you know what it is I'm building. Pop a timestamp for when you made your guess, and then reply to that when you get to the end, when you actually know what it is. Tell me how well you did. And details are important, so don't jump in too soon, because there might be a couple of surprises towards the end. And here's the bet of sorts. If your guess has any part of it wrong, you've got to help me tally the results by clicking the like button. It's really the only mathematical way I'll ever know if I've surprised you. And I promise you, whether you decide to build it or not, if it ends up how it looks in here, I think you're going to love it. But we are way off that yet. Now, though the hexagons themselves get steadily smaller, the sides marked A stay the same throughout. And that size is the width of the 4 panels that I've cut from the 1/2-inch ply. You see, this whole project can be made from a 1/4 sheet of 1/2-inch ply and just enough 3/4-inch ply to make the hexagons. The length of the 4 panels that you cut, well, that dictates the height of the overall build. Whereas side A, well, that dictates the width. And right from the start, I know there's going to be some challenges with what is a seemingly simple build. It can't be as simple as it looks in my head. The first one of those challenges came really quite quickly. I want a gentle slope to this 3D hexagon type thing. And that means an angled cut for each of the hexagons that I'm going to cut out. And you're going to see in a minute how I cobble that together. And just to clarify, this is now end of build mark talking, whereas before build didn't know how this is going to end up. It's not without its mistakes. The scraps that I cut show the angle, and if my maths is right, all the hexagons just need the same angle on all of their sides. Possibly. Rough cutting them out just seems sensible at this stage, purely to get them through the table saw. And just know, I am absolutely convinced you could do this build with a circular saw set at an angle or even a track saw. And for me, it's time for the MVP of this build, my match fit jig. This was initially designed to run adjacent to the table saw blade so that you could lock a board to it and level the cut line with the edge of the board. There is one slight issue. The slight angle of the blade does create a gap between the jig and the blade. So instead of making a whole new jig for this, I just set the cut liner, finger in the wind, 3mm away from the edge itself. So yeah, you can rule out fine furniture at this point in your guesses. And while I'm cutting all these hexagon pieces, I'll give you your first clue. This is for the workshop. I didn't say it was a good clue. Okay, I'll give you a second clue. And this is a big statement. This has the potential to be the most efficient, yet accessible, space-saving tool storage for a workshop you have ever seen. Maybe, possibly, potentially, could be. Although, as you can see from this test fit, it looks a little bit more like a cake stand. It's not a cake stand for the workshop, although that could be quite cool. Bit dusty though, yeah. But good. Sorry, where was I? Oh yeah, cake, no. Oh yeah, 4 identical rectangular faces. Now it's starting to look like something. But I also need to fill these gaps between them, so back to the MVP sled. I actually ended up cutting rectangles first so I could then taper both edges. I was in 2 minds about showing you this bit, as technically the plyboard is wider than it is long, so cross-cutting it is not actually the best way to go. So like anything you see in all of my videos, these are the choices I've made. Please, with safety in mind, don't do anything that doesn't feel safe to you. And for anybody who watches regularly, I'm pretty sure you're going to have noticed I haven't made any of my customary mistakes yet. I know, I was a little surprised too. And by the way, while we're on the subject of past videos, if you've watched any before, thank you so much for being part of this, whatever this is. If you're new to the channel, welcome. This is kind of what we do here. A mix of planned and very unplanned builds. More unplanned. Some for the house, most at the moment for the workshop, all very beginner friendly. Loads and loads of mistakes, all embraced, always. I bet there's some people that have already guessed what they think I'm making. Remember, if you're wrong, you know what to click. And if you've never watched YouTube before, let me just quickly help you out. The comment section is just below the subscribe button. Now, I did have a quick thought here that actually thickening some of the tapered sections might help in the long run. A bit of scrap wood is all it took. And it's about now that it is actually getting quite hard to hide what I'm actually doing. Nothing to see here, just a series of differently sized holes. Air holes maybe, just part of the mystery. But honestly, it's about to become fairly obvious what I'm making. Well, the main part of it, not the actual cool bit. Some may see this as a waste of a lovely Sapele board, but I spend long hours in this workshop filming and making, so I see all these little features as part of the comfort of the place. But you can use whatever scraps you've got at hand. And if you are making this and you want to make it as nice as possible, there are thin rip jigs that will get you a more standard thin rip rather than what I'm doing here, which is just guesswork. I'm just ripping 5 or 6 nearly identical width strips. The fact they're coming off the same board here, oh, that's enough. Because that will mean that one dimension will be the same throughout the strips. And the next parts you're going to see me make are actually just customized to the use of the overall build. Just take the ideas and the basics here and then make it your own. I'll show you a few being made and then I'll show you the complete piece at the end, but I won't waste your time with every single panel. Just know that the battens need to be held on with a reasonable strength, so I'm going to use glue and then I'm just going to countersink and drive some small screws through from the back. I do tend to do this with cheaper ply because actually what you're doing with the glue is just sticking to the veneer, and if the veneer comes away then the joint is pretty useless. And you're also going to see a fair amount of magnets being used. Like everything you see in the video, I'll leave some links down to the magnets down below. I particularly like the ones that you're going to see with a countersink screw hole through the middle, just for some added strength, especially if they're going to hold heavy items. Clue number 3. Because I'm also using CA glue to hold them in, but the screw just gives you that extra safety there. And where possible, because I like to go the extra step, I'm going to cover some of these magnets just with this sticky back felt, just so you don't get that metal on metal sound every time. Now, before I put this thing together, I just want to take a moment to talk about the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. I've had a Squarespace website now for years. And at the start, I chose them because I actually have very limited PC skills. And their system of creating a website actually makes the whole process really simple. I was able to choose a template from the hundreds of examples and then tailor it to my exact style. In truth, I was up and running in a matter of hours. Adapting, tweaking, and adding to the site is easy too. I make changes all the time. Like adding a page dedicated to selling. And with that, Squarespace makes taking payments really simple. And they've got numerous ways to pay. You can link to relevant videos to complement your sales, or like me, to advise people on pages and pages of tool recommendations. Then simply choose your custom URL and you can start delving into the analytics. So if you're at the stage that I was, where you need a website but the whole thing feels like a huge undertaking, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. Take your time, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/start making and you'll get 10% off your first domain or website purchase. And now, back to the build. Now, there was a number of ways I considered holding this build together. Glue and brad nails would more than likely be easiest. I did consider that I might want to take this apart and adapt it down the line. I may even want to be able to take these faces off and interchange them with other ones that I make. So the simplest idea, as it often is, seem like pocket holes. And you're going to see that when making that choice, I didn't quite think it through because the last panel's, well, going to be difficult to get to from the inside. But don't worry, that's okay. Anyway, here's all the pieces. I've laid them out just to show you how simple this build really is. And actually, in adding mystery, I've probably made it sound more complicated than it needs to. Now, the blank surfaces you see won't remain blank forever. And as you can see, there are other sides I haven't even shown you. Each side comprises of either magnets or battens, and I'll show you at the end how they've been specifically designed for each of their uses. And now to hook it all together. I've set the pocket holes on the top of the top piece and on the underside of the bottom piece. The middle is the issue, because we can do most of it, but not the last couple of screws. But we'll get to that. I spent a long time hooking up the first piece, checking all sides were flush and square, and then once that and its opposing side were connected and square, well, the rest lined up fairly nicely. The rule of pocket holes is the same no matter what you are building. Clamp as hard as you can, because the screw will try and move the joint. Don't drive the screw too hard, and use the right length screws for the job. For those hard to reach places, pull out your handy right angled bit holder and take your time. And then stop. And realise that you haven't actually planned any further than this point. In honesty, you weren't even sure that you'd get to this point with only 2 hours of brain planning. But you did. And suddenly, you've got an idea. But it is around now that I hope that all of you are starting to write your comments, because there's a very good chance everyone that's commented to this point is probably wrong. I'm really sorry. For anybody who isn't there yet with the first bit of the build, don't worry. I'm still going to keep it quiet to keep that suspense going. But it's not all plain sailing from here. These are Lazy Susan hardware. 2 metal hoops with bearings in between, attach wood top and bottom, and then the pieces can spin together on the bottom. Something like that anyway, but it's not quite that simple. You see, what you can't tell is that this is already quite heavy. And I didn't show you this bracket that I've thrown together to put into the corner. Just know that if you're doing it, that it's got to be strong enough to not get any sag. Because I plan on having a Lazy Susan hardware on the top and the bottom. And any misalignment is going to mean that they're no longer coplanar and it's going to jam. You'll find out how I know this. But anyway, these discs should make it easier to attach to the hardware. Should. I mean, this does feel like it's going to be hard work from the start. But nevertheless, with one spinner on the bottom, it actually felt like it was going to work. But that's nowhere near strong enough. But while I try and make a second bracket for the top, let me tell you about why I am actually doing this in theory. You see, the corner of any workspace, as I said before, can be a completely dead space. And if you've ever watched my French cleat wall video, you'll know that I say to look at your storage wall as a 3D box rather than just a flat surface. If there's any dead space, use it in its entirety. Take a corner, for instance. The dead space in a corner is not just a square foot on each of the 2 walls. It's actually a cubic foot of space between them. And also, please don't forget, this is just a prototype. I know the brackets take up a load of space beneath them. Just imagine if it was to be sat on a cabinet, or if you could replace the big bracket below with a slimline metal bracket that could still take the same weight, well then you're really onto something. However, it was around this point that I thought I'd actually got it wrong, because after 10 to 12 attempts to align the spinner, well, it was spinning perfectly flat on the base, but the top was out of plane, and so it was jamming. And honestly, after that many attempts, I was close to giving up, because I didn't genuinely know that this should work. And I'm not just telling you this to build up some sort of suspense for a great victory moment at the end, but I did honestly decide to give it one more try. You see, I decided to slow down for a minute and stop looking across at the finish line. Technically, the alignment was an issue, but it wasn't the major issue. The major issue was actually friction. You see, both metal loops are exactly the same thickness, and so when they're attached to the thing, the thing being it, what are we going to call it? Let's call it spinning storage for now. So when they're attached to the spinning storage, they were actually rubbing. And after just the few tests that I've run on it, you can already see smooth and shiny sections where it has rubbed. And so for the first time in ages, I actually used my laser to make something that I would not probably be able to make myself. Well, not quickly and accurately anyway. I cut 2 hoops of ply with a millimetre gap between them to use as spacers. Lining up the holes was easy. I just drilled through from the hardware itself. And to make the fitting and the alignment easier there, I just put a few screws partially through. I measured for alignment, as I had done before, and just in case the wall was out of square, which it could be because I built it, I used a spirit level to ensure top and bottom spinners were in line. And for the first time in ages, I was genuinely actually filming the moment when I first tested my prototype. And you get to see firsthand why I do this. I get asked a lot, why do I keep making stuff for my workshop? Why do I try these prototypes? Why? That's why. That goofy little celebration, well, that's why. And now you can see fully what I had planned. So take a second, if your guess was wrong, click the like button, just so I can tally it. But you know me, there's a chance I took it a few steps further, and I also want to tell you what I could do extra if I decided to go the extra mile. So let me show you it. And so here it is. This is the rotating, for me, hand tool storage carousel. It's not the catchy name that it's going to keep. I've made 1 or 2 additions since you last saw it. I've gotten a bit fancy and I've put some hard wax oil on it. That's nothing more than for aesthetics. But the biggest change is I've filled it with all the tools it's going to hold. Let me show you what we've got on here and then I'll put it into perspective for you. We've got block planes, specialist planes, we've got marking tools, we've got router plane, we've got my number 5 for my shooting board, Allen keys, Shinto rasp, big number 7 jointing plane. We've got the Stanley cabinet scraper, we've got 2 marking knives, 1 for glue squeeze out, 1 for marking, 5 of these little clamps, which if you've ever used them are super useful. Another number 5, which doesn't work on the shooting board, but I use for everything else. And then the last part of the carousel. I've got scissors, I've got screwdrivers, I've got a marking wheel, marking gauge, and then I've got all of my Forstner bits. Now, I'm not against admitting when I'm wrong. This is a terrible place to store your Forstner bits, and I've got a better idea for what you could do with this if you don't do that. Forstner bits are really sharp and they tend to jam a little bit in the holes and, well, you can see injuries have been caused. So what I suggest is, rather than jamming things into this, I've got a really clever idea that I wish I'd tried before, and if you make one of these, I'd love someone to try it. I would take 3 panels, join them together, hinge down the side, have it opening with a nice latch, and then you've got all of this storage right in the middle of the carousel. Now that is 100% maximising the available space. With that in mind, this on the top will become a little shelf of sorts. For now, it's just got my clamp razors on it, and underneath, well, as I said, if I tidy up this bracket, I've got all the space underneath to use for anything that I want to, rather than the junk that's there now. Oh, and I've put some fancy knobs on the bottom so you can spin it easily. With the extra weight, it doesn't spin out of control. It's just got a nice tactile feel to it, and I love it. I'm already thinking of other ideas of how I can make use of this elsewhere. Now I'm going to put this into perspective. Right now you're going to see exactly how many tools are on this carousel, and don't forget there was actually space to spare. That's a lot of tools, all in one carousel. So whether you try this or whether you don't, I thoroughly hope you've enjoyed this video. This is what I love doing. If you've got ideas for me, that's what the comment section's for. If you're new to the channel, that's what the subscribe's for. Thank you so much for joining me on this little journey. I hope we can have many more in the future. If you've loved this build, I have a hunch you're gonna love this one. But if you don't, YouTube's picked that for you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you over there.